Hello friends, I'm excited to finally bring you my video about the new Pastel Ohuhu marker set. I had a lot of questions about them in my recent live streams, and Ohuhu were so kind to send them to me and sponsor today's video so that I may try them out and let y'all know my thoughts. So much like the previous marker set that I received, these come in a great zip-up pouch and come with the plastic sheet so that you can put it behind your page to prevent any marker bleed through to the other side. And they are dual-tipped alcohol markers, one tip being a chisel nib and then the other side having a brush nib. It also comes with these two swatch cards that list all the colors, which I think make for a great reference to see all the color selection all together. And then lastly, it comes with this little pamphlet that shows a little kind of marker blending guide, as well as some info on the fact that you can actually flip the brush nib to reveal a fresh new side on the other end, which I think is great. So for today's video, I'll be working in the Ohuhu marker sketchbook, and I actually had some space left over on the bottom of the previous swatch page I had made in my other video, so I went ahead and added the pastel markers onto this page as well. And I already made the swatches on the swatch cards already, but I like to do another round in the sketchbook since the paper is slightly different, which ends up making the colors look a little bit different as well. So most of you probably already know this, but I love pastel color palettes, and when I was trying to decide on what I wanted to draw in today's video, it actually reminded me of this sketch that I did a while back that I never ended up using for anything. So it's super summery and cutesy, which I thought went perfect with these colors. The sketch was done digitally on my iPad using the Procreate app, and so I just printed it out and used a light pad to trace it onto the Ohuhu marker paper using an erasable red pencil. Then from there, I began blocking in the colors. For this piece, I decided I wanted the colors to be fairly flat to lean into a more graphic kind of cartoony look. And the initial color I laid down for her skin I found was leaning a little bit more yellow than I had wanted, so after the first layer I ended up going over it a second time with a warmer brown color, which not only helped even out the base layer, but it also gave a more warmer hue, which is what I originally wanted. That, I find, is the great thing about using pastel or lighter toned markers in general, is that it gives you a little bit more wiggle room to layer them to create either new colors, and it also allows you to slowly build up the values as well. Of course, you can only layer so many times to achieve certain values. Like, of course, I'm never going to achieve a super dark brown or a black with the colors in this set. But I really like having pastel colors in my collection because for illustrations that I want to do more blending or have like a variety of tones or rendering, the pastel or lighter toned selection makes it much easier to do that. Of course, if you're someone who generally prefers really dark, bold colors, this set definitely would not make sense for you. However, if you currently own a lot of mid to dark colors and need to add a little bit more variety to your collection, then this would definitely be a great set to round it out. Or of course, if you're someone who usually works with pastel color palettes, then obviously this is definitely right up your alley. Something that I love about drawing cute, fashionable girls is that, in a way, I can vicariously live through them with what they're doing or what they're wearing. I often get a lot of questions about where my inspiration comes from, and one of them is definitely from fashion. And for this piece, I basically constructed an entire outfit that I wish I personally owned in real life. I think that pleated skirts are so cute, which is probably a result of my lifelong love of Sailor Moon. And I also have been really into scalloped edging or scalloped trims on clothing, so that's why I went ahead and did that on her little crop top there. And after working on this piece, it also really made me crave bubble tea, since that's the drink that she's holding in her hand, and I haven't had bubble tea in a while. It's definitely something that immediately makes me think of spring and summertime, you know, getting bubble tea with my friends and going to the park. And that is definitely something that I really miss. And I really hope that we can hopefully do that again someday when the pandemic is over and when the weather is warmer in Toronto, of course. In the original sketch that I had done, I had clouds for the background, but I decided to change it to this kind of cutesy rounded border, which was directly inspired by this filter on the Instagram stories that I use a lot. The filter on Instagram definitely has a much more retro vibe in its color choices, but I thought that it would still translate well for this piece too with these pastel colors. Then at this point in the illustration, I decided to use a purple marker to add in some light shadows. Like I mentioned earlier, the general vibe I wanted for this piece was to have it have a more cartoony look, so I didn't do any heavy rendering or anything like that, but I think that the subtle purple shadows give it a little bit more dimension and interest. And if you're familiar with my marker illustrations, you'll probably know that I pretty much always use colored pencils on top as well. I think that it gives the piece a really nice light texture, and I also think that it gives me a lot of control in being able to add a lot of subtle color variations and shading as well. Then when it comes to line art on my marker drawings, I often go back and forth between using colored pencils, fine liners, and brush markers. Sometimes I'll even combine all three together depending on the piece. And I originally had intended to use some black fine liners that Ohuhu had sent me for this, but I actually felt like black line art just didn't quite suit this particular illustration. I think that black would have just looked a little bit too harsh for this very pastel color palette, so I thought that a dark blue would be a nice kind of happy medium. Of course, I could have used a blue fine liner, which I definitely have a few in different brands, but I actually thought that it might be fun to bust out my dip pen again and use some acrylic ink instead. This is a combination I've never done before, like using the alcohol markers with a dip pen, but I gotta say, I not only really enjoyed the process, but I also really like how it looked in the end as well. Back in October, I had done a full Morticia Addams fan art illustration using dip pens and black India ink on some hot press watercolor paper. I hadn't used the dip pen since then, and so I was initially kind of nervous about using it in this application, but thankfully this marker paper is super smooth, which ended up being perfect for the dip pen. I feel like they were meant to be. The nib just effortlessly glides along the surface, which was incredibly satisfying to experience, and I think that the blue really complemented the other colors in this illustration as well. So yeah, I am really, really happy I decided to conduct this little experiment because I definitely think that this combination looked really nice, and I think I will probably use this mixed media approach again in the future. And then for the final touches of this drawing, I decided to give her some freckles using a colored pencil instead of the ink since I wanted it to be a little bit more subtle. And then of course I added in some white highlights to her eyes using my favorite Posca white paint marker. Then moving on to the next drawing. If you saw my video last week, you'll know that one of my art goals this year is to do more experimenting with my art. So in the spirit of that, I thought that I'd work on something that didn't include a person or a figure as the subject. So I was sifting through my old photos on my phone and I came across this really adorable photo that I took a while back of my old roommate's cat, Meow Meow, hanging out in my window. I know, isn't Meow Meow the most hilarious and adorable name ever? It's so simple and yet so cute. This pastel color palette really is just so perfect for these markers, and I think that the soft pink glow against the light blue sky is so pretty, and then of course our beautiful little black and white kitty makes for such a nice contrast against these very light colors. Sadly, Meow Meow has passed away, but thankfully I have tons of photos and I'm sure I'll do more drawings of her in the future because I absolutely adored her and I miss her all the time. She was definitely one of those cats who was just incredibly sweet, and you'd be able to pick her up and she wouldn't make a fuss. She never scratched or bit me. But she was also simultaneously very petty and vengeful. Like, she loved attention, she loved cuddles, she would sleep with me, but if she was mad at you for whatever reason, she would let you know by either taking a dump or puking on your bed. And I'm sure that a lot of you cat owners can relate. I think that I definitely love cats and dogs, but I think because I've lived with cats, I have like a little bit of a special place in my heart for them, even though it is kind of a double-edged sword having a cat. But in any case, I still have very, very fond memories of her, and I have so many hilarious stories too. But yeah, for this drawing, I wanted to keep it pretty minimal, so I chose to make the curtains just like a solid color rather than attempting the intricate lace. I also thought that this was a great opportunity to practice stylizing how I draw animals, or at least a cat anyways. And yeah, animals is something that I have a hard time with since I draw them so rarely, and I'm sure it will take some time to figure out how I want to interpret them in my own style, but overall I think this was definitely a good step in the right direction. Basically, my approach was to try and focus on simple shapes and form rather than fussing around with details like the fur or anything like that, and understanding how to draw multiple different animals is going to take some time, but I'm not mad at how this turned out. But yeah, if you're ever stumped on what to draw, I definitely recommend just going through some of your old photos and seeing if anything sparks some inspiration or motivation. And not only that, but it also is just really heartwarming to look back on your old memories. And I think sometime in the near future, I definitely want to be recreating some of the old photos that I came across from like my travel trips. And I think it'll be really, really fun to just, again, explore things that don't necessarily include people. And now, of course, for the last segment of this video is where I'm going to do some fan art portraits and have some fandom chats. And first up, we have Beth Harmon from the Netflix series The Queen's Gambit. As per usual, I was a little bit late to the party, but better late than never, right? Filming my sketching process still stresses me out a little bit, so I went ahead and did 3 of the portraits off camera and then filmed the sketching portion of Beth, which surprisingly ended up being my favorite portrait of the 4, despite being the one that I filmed. And I think the reason why I often feel a little bit stressed out while I'm sketching on camera is because I just become so hyper aware of the fact that I am erasing so frequently, or, I have to make sure that I'm not moving the sketchbook around because I just find that really jarring to watch when watching time lapses. And sometimes, depending on where the sketch is placed on my desk, the proportion sometimes can get skewed because I'm looking at it at an angle. But in any case, I actually ended up really, really enjoying how Beth turned out. So crisis averted, I guess. Anyway, when I began watching the show, I had a feeling I was going to like it since everyone was giving it such rave reviews. And even though I had no idea what it was about, I kind of went into it being like, okay, this is probably going to be good since it's so popular right now. And I'm happy to say that I was definitely not disappointed. Even though, I don't know how to play chess, I don't know anything about it, but I really did think that the series was really fascinating and super well done, even though I have pretty much no investment in the game of chess. Of course, the stories and characters were very compelling, but something that I continued to really enjoy was actually the fashion and the sets. I especially loved how lavish and over-the-top Beth's and her adoptive mother's home was decorated. I found that the colors were just so rich and there were so many patterns and it just was so fun. And a part of me was like, I want my home to look like that. Something that I really appreciated about the show was that Beth's determination and passion for chess was always the focal point and the due north for the series. There was something pretty refreshing about how the show treated other events and people in her life in a very anticlimactic way, which to me felt really real and relatable. In most TV shows and movies, I find that certain events in a young woman's life, such as getting your period, being physically intimate with someone, finding love, etc., are treated with such emphasis. But honestly, most of the time, those types of things are not really as grandiose as one might think. And in a similar fashion, there were a lot of people that came and went throughout Beth's life that, while of course they served some kind of purpose, they didn't necessarily have to be this overly dramatic encounter or situation. Like the mean girl from her high school. I was totally expecting her to be this super antagonistic force in Beth's life and was just going to be relentless. But in the end, she just ended up, growing up and becoming a distant acquaintance in the end. And really, that's kind of how life is half the time. I also really loved that the series spent a lot of time showing Beth's relationships and dynamics with other women in her life. I thought that while her adoptive mother, of course, had her flaws, ultimately, it was great that she was so supportive and encouraging of Beth, even though she didn't really understand chess. And I think that a lot of the times in media, parents are depicted as being the antagonist to the main character's pursuit of something that's maybe unconventional. So yeah, it was really nice to see that the mother just ends up being so encouraging of Beth's passion. Also, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the series yet and you don't want to be spoiled, skip ahead a minute. I really loved that when Beth hits her rock bottom, I totally thought that one of the men in her life, like Benny or someone else, was going to be the one that helps her get back up on her feet. But instead, it ends up being her childhood best friend, Jolene, and that just made me so happy to see. And something that absolutely broke my heart was when Beth goes back to the orphanage and finds out how William Scheibel, the custodian, had been quietly supporting her and keeping tabs on her all this time. Oh, it made me cry. It was so sweet and so heartbreaking. But yeah, needless to say, I really loved this series. And if you have Netflix and have not checked out this show yet, I highly, highly recommend it. Next up, we have Eliza Schuyler, or Eliza Hamilton, from the musical Hamilton. Now, if you've come to some of my live streams, you'll probably already know that I'm now a pretty big fan of Hamilton after finally having the opportunity to watch it a la Disney Plus. I really would love to be able to see it live. Unfortunately, when it finally came to Toronto, COVID hit, and so of course theaters are currently closed indefinitely. So hopefully when we can go to theaters again, I would definitely love to see it performed on stage. And while I know that Angelica is often seen as the standout performance, which deservedly so, that role is incredible and Renee was so good, I felt compelled to draw Eliza instead, since it gave me an opportunity to depict a pained or sad expression. And this might sound kind of strange, but I actually find that this type of expression is pretty fun to draw, and so whenever I have an opportunity to do it, I will. And I know that with Broadway, the performers will change every so often, and there have been many different actresses in the role of Eliza, but I chose to use photos of Philippa Sue for my drawing since she was part of the original cast and of course is the iteration that I am most familiar with for this character. And when I'm drawing portraits of people, whether it be real life people or animated characters, I'm typically not going for perfect realism. I prefer to stylize them in my own way while trying to capture a little bit of their likeness or at least get the general vibe of the character. That being said, when I finished this portrait, I felt like she ended up looking a lot more like Emma Watson as Belle in the live action Beauty and the Beast rather than Philippa Sue as Eliza from Hamilton. And I mean, I'm not entirely mad at this. I think that overall the drawing turned out fine. It's just for me, like when I look at it, my brain reads it as Emma Watson as Belle first. Of course, this was totally unintentional, but that's just sometimes the way things pan out, and that's okay. Not every drawing is going to be a winner, and that's something that I'm trying to be better about accepting. So, I don't know about you guys, but I find it pretty interesting to be able to check out my most listened to music at the end of the year according to Spotify. And while I'm not usually surprised about what my most listened to artists and albums are, one of the music genres that I wasn't expecting to see in my top 5 was, I think it was called Original Soundtrack. And then after thinking about it for a moment, I realized that it was mostly due to the fact that I had listened to the Hamilton soundtrack quite a lot last year. And it goes without saying, but the music in Hamilton is incredible. And I think what is so great about it is that it hits a lot of different genres. And my particular favorite songs, I think, have to be Satisfied and Nonstop. But really, pretty much every song on that entire soundtrack is amazing. I was actually so obsessed with Satisfied that I had spent more time than I'd like to admit learning the song in its entirety, including getting the timing right on the rap. Next up, we have our boy Tamaki from the anime Ouran High School Host Club. When I was deciding on which characters to draw for this video, Tamaki was the very first character to pop up into my head. Mainly because when I think about a series or a character that I would heavily associate with a pastel color palette, Ouran High School Host Club is definitely at the top of that list. When I was looking at reference photos for both Beth and Eliza, I really liked the strong, bright lighting on them, so I figured I might as well carry that into the other two portraits as well. Since even though the top 2 fan arts are of live action characters and the bottom 2 are animated, I think that doing this type of lighting for all of them ended up making them feel somewhat cohesive, even though they're all very, very different from each other. I was quite obsessed with this anime back when I myself was in high school. And a few months ago, I noticed that it was on Netflix, so I thought that it would be fun to rewatch it since that's kind of been a big trend of mine during quarantine is rewatching a lot of old favorites. And I am very happy to say that it was still a absolute delight to rewatch, and it was very, very nostalgic. It is most definitely a feel-good series. The style and aesthetics of it are really pretty, and it's got a very particular brand of humor that I still find hilarious. Tamaki will always be my favorite because even though his character is so melodramatic and self-absorbed, he is also very genuine and sincere, which I find to be very endearing. For some context to those of you who have never seen it, the series revolves around these ultra-rich high school students who attend a very prestigious high school, and the main character, Haruhi, is one of the few students who's actually middle class and got into the school on a scholarship. With that, there's an episode where she brings instant coffee, and Tamaki's reaction and fascination with it is so absurd and hilarious. I mean, pretty much any of his reactions or ideas of what being middle class is what makes the show just so ridiculous and fun. To this day, I still can't get over the fact that they never made more seasons, which really surprises me since it was incredibly popular when it initially came out, and I know that there's much more to the story from the manga that they could have pulled from. I've never actually read the manga myself, but I do remember my friend was reading it back in the day when we were in high school, and she would give me like little updates on what was happening. Mostly I just wanted to keep tabs on whether or not Haruhi ended up with Tamaki. Pretty sure that they did. It was meant to be, in my opinion. But anyways, if you're a fan of light, feel-good animes, I definitely would say that this would be right up your alley. And last but not least, we have Inosuke from the anime Demon Slayer. I think for at least a solid year, many of you guys had been asking me if I'd seen this series yet, and a few months ago, I finally went ahead and watched it, and I really love it. I fully understand why people kept recommending it to me. It's really, really good. The fight sequences are stellar. I am especially in awe of the way that they animated and stylized the elemental bits for the sword fighting, especially the water. Oh, it's very reminiscent of Hokusai's piece, The Wave, and it's just beautiful to watch. Plus, the lore of the series, I think, is really interesting as well. And while the series deals with a lot of darker themes, they do have characters that provide some humor and levity as well, which I think makes for a really nice balance so that the series isn't just heavy and dark the entire time. Speaking of, the general aesthetics of this series is definitely quite high contrast and bold, which doesn't necessarily make sense with this marker selection of pastel colors, but I wanted an excuse to draw a character from this series, so I made it work. My favorite character in the series is actually Gyu Tomioka, but I'd say Inosuke is a close second. And the reason why I didn't draw Gyu in this video is because I really want to make a proper illustration of him at some point when I get the chance, either with gouache or watercolor, I'm not really sure yet. So that's the reason why I decided to draw Inosuke instead. And I gotta say, it was quite fun drawing him. I don't draw expressions that show a lot of teeth very often, and I also don't think I've rendered like a bare male chest in quite a long time. So yeah, it was a really fun challenge, and It was really funny. I took like a preview picture of it for my Instagram stories and I captioned it like drawing a shirtless dude for next YouTube video. And a few people actually guessed the character right, which was pretty impressive, but I guess it's because he pretty much never wears a shirt. So I guess it's a pretty distinctive trait of him. Something that I find so hilarious about his character is that generally he's quite aggressive and masculine in the way that he carries himself and typically wears a boar head on top of his own. But then it's revealed that he is like the prettiest boy underneath with this Howl Pendragon haircut and luscious eyelashes. And I think it's just so amusing. And after I watched the series and I was talking to my friend about it, she sent me this YouTube compilation video of every time Inosuke said Tanjiro's name wrong, which just totally made my day because he shouts it with such confidence, even though he's totally getting it wrong. And there's just something very endearing about his character, even though he's trying to put up this very strong front, but deep down he's a big old softie, I think. Also, as a side note, I have to say, the opening theme song for Demon Slayer might be one of my favorite songs right now. It is so freaking catchy. So much so that I actually went ahead and made a Spotify playlist of a bunch of my favorite opening and ending theme songs from various anime, both new and old series, and it has actually been such a blast to listen to while I'm working. Nothing hypes you up more than a shonen anime opening theme song, I gotta say. And yeah, I mean, it goes without saying, but I am really looking forward to watching the new Demon Slayer movie. I did accidentally read a major spoiler about it, so I'm trying to emotionally brace myself for it, but either way, I think it's going to be really good. Apparently, it received a lot of success in its release in Japan, so I'm sure I'm going to be really hyped when I finally get around to watching it. Anyways, I hope that you had fun watching me work in my sketchbook with these new pastel Ohuhu markers and listening to me gush about various TV shows and characters. If it wasn't already evident, I really enjoy using the Ohuhu markers, and I think that they are a great affordable option when it comes to alcohol-based markers. Oh, and also shout out to those of you who have been letting me know about the fact that you started watching a particular TV show after I've talked about it in my live streams or videos. It brings me so much joy being able to chat fandoms with you guys, which is why I like making this type of content. But it's like an added bonus knowing that I am kind of introducing some of you to a series that you had initially never seen before and are enjoying. I never really expected that to happen, but I think that's so awesome. Anyways, that's it from me. Thank you so much for indulging me with these silly voiceovers, and I hope that it was entertaining or at least kept you company while you worked on something. And yeah, have an amazing day or evening. I look forward to catching you in the next one. Bye!